honorable guests, dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you. On behalf of Lingnan University of Hong Kong, organizing team and the Global University for Sustainability and PeaceWomen across the globe, I welcome you all to Feminist Gathering, Feminist Futures, Politics of Possibilities 1 and 2. Today, we have the section 1, and tomorrow, 3 July, the 3rd of July, we will have the session 2 at UTC 10 a.m. in the morning for further discussion and sharing the theme of feminist futures. We are honored to have the speakers to share your experience and ideas. With such a precious chance for us to learn from each other, I believe these 2 days sections are going to be intellectually engaging and morally inspiring. A good opportunity to share different perspectives of feminist futures from different regions and countries. I would like to introduce the history of PWAG. The organization of PeaceWomen across the globe is based on the initiatives 1,000 Women for Nobel Peace Prize, which started in 2003 in Switzerland by women active in peace work. 1,000 women were collectively nominated for the 2005 Nobel Peace Prize to represent the hundreds of thousands of women, peace activists, and as a symbol of the courageous, but mostly invisible, peace work undertaken by women. Even though the PeaceWomen were not awarded the prestigious prize in 2005, the global campaign and the networking conducted by PeaceWomen across the globe, associations have helped to make women's commitments and expertise more visible. The association work has also enabled women to contribute their knowledge to conflict resolution, peace, and democratization processes. In the first lecture of this forum of June 15, Gustave Estefan from Mexico talked about friendship, hope, and surprise. I quote, "No face, no contact, no interaction with others, even the loved ones. They can contaminate you, even kill you by sharing their COVID-19 confinement. Children plugged into the screen for hours, attending classes of a universal curriculum, increasingly irrelevant for their lives. Can we still call this a human society? A human society? Systematic destruction of Mother Earth, increasing violence and dismantling of the social fabric, and the state of law, with increasing illegal control of people's lives. In Mexico, 100 people are assassinated every day, and immense areas have remained for years under criminal control. It has become increasingly difficult to draw a line between the world of the institutions and the world of crime. Evident in the past year are the extremes of national and global inequities exacerbated by COVID-19. Having lost jobs or income sources, millions were forced to reinvent themselves to survive. The above are the speech of the Gustave. The opening speech touched me very much. We will edit it soon for public sharing. Please be patient to wait. For the 8th forum, the main theme is the question of the politics of hope. We have already started dialogues, lectures, and debates in the forum. And in the following days, we will still have debates and lectures from July 4 to July 19. And we will privilege with the insights of the many eminent speakers. And we can all look forward to profound intellectual exchanges. Today's section is titled Feminist Futures, Politics of Possibilities. The COVID-19 systematic has made the failures and weaknesses of the militarized capitalist system very obvious. It has exposed and deepened the divide between rich and poor, between those who are served and those who serve, with a few having economically benefited in unprecedented ways. The world's majority people are suffering more acutely. Gender-based violence has increased tremendously worldwide, and militarized responses, including scorching political desistance, appear to be the norm in many places. Examples of feminist future do exist, however. In this interactive section, we will focus on envisioning feminist futures and sharing inspiration stories of already existing examples. Feminists from over the world come together to share their strategies and ideas and to develop a vision for solidarity. I would like to introduce myself. My name is AUYEUNG. I'm a founding member of Global University for Sustainability, a fellow of ARENA, and a coordinator of Lingnan Gardeners, Lingnan University of Hong Kong. I'm a regional representative of PeaceWomen across the globe in Hong Kong and mainland China, and one of the coordinators of book Asia Feminist. I'm also a Tai Chi coach and have practiced Tai Chi for over 20 years. Many thanks to my co-moderators today, Margo OKAZAWA-REY and Carla women are the part of this team organized. Margo OKAZAWA is one of the co-founders of the International Women's Network Against Militarism. The IWNAM educates about and campaign against militarism and, in particular, the presence and impacts of US military bases and operations in East Asia and Pacific. Her main areas of research and activism since 1994 are militarism, armed conflicts, and violence against women, understood intersectionally. I would like to shorten here. And then, Margo OKAZAWA-REY has a member of the International Board of PeaceWomen across the globe since 2003. Our two interpreters for Spanish English are Mercedes Pico and Nora Lafunti, and two interpreters for English Chinese are Lan Yin and Li Menhong. I wish when you recall your participation in these two sections some years later, what you will remember are not only inspiring ideas, but also ever fresh friendships we make today through the internet. For we know that what really connects us in this webinar is not some virtual space, but the real world and the love that we all share. For the feminists, being a feminist means that you fight for the equality of all people. It's important that your feminism is intersectional. It should not exclude people based on their gender, race, socioeconomic status, ability, or sexual orientation. Feminism allows people to look at the world not as it is, but how it could be. You change your world, you change your mind, you change the world. Once again, we thank you for joining us in making this feminist gathering a memorable event. Dear Margo, the floor is yours.
As Lai Seung already said, and as you all know, the main theme of our conversation is feminist politics of hope and possibilities, really, possibilities. And I just want to say that recently I had an insight that for me, hope means recognizing the past, that is where we come from, and our ancestors, also recognizing where we are in this political moment and seeing the future, seeing the possibilities in the future. And for me, that's what inspires me. And I hope that you'll hear from all of our speakers today some similar ideas and concrete ideas of what we think a feminist future should look like, or what we want it to be. And so, as I was saying to our participants earlier, a lot of webinars give lots of critique and, all that. So we want to really imagine and think big and also hear concrete ways that all of our panelists are doing the work of creating the future or living in some ways in the future. We also asked all of our participants to come with your own vision and your own representations of a feminist future possibilities, politics of possibilities. So we will have an interactive session together. And as Lai Seung said, what we're also trying to do is make new connections, deepen connections we have already, because for me, anyway, fundamentally, feminist politics is deepening relationships, because that's what will, in my experience, carries the day over distance, over time, over generations. So here we go, without further ado. We asked our participants to think about several questions to frame their presentation. And those questions have to do with, when you imagine a feminist future, what 3 values and principles do you think should be foundational, and why? Oh, I heard myself going too fast. Okay, sorry. The next question is, what kind of feminist must we become to sustain our vision, right? And what kinds of solidarity do we want as feminist communities? And then the third question is also important. That is, thinking about what is confusing us, or our panelists, what's confusing you about your work situation or your context as you imagine the future you wish to create. So those are the 3 questions, and I'll do a brief introduction of each person just before they speak. Each person will speak for about 10 minutes. And as you're listening, please take your own notes. Pay attention to what your body is also telling you as you're listening to our speakers. So thank you very much again. And Carla, you just want to open your camera and just say hi. Carla is our co-conspirator, and she's here with us. So
hi, everyone. Yes, thank you very much, Lai Seung and Margo. I'm really happy to be here. Unfortunately, I'm a bit sick from getting a COVID vaccine, which I know is so lucky to get it so early. So I'm very grateful and excited, but a bit weak. And I just want to say that I'm very happy to see such a big group of people joining us today and such amazing speakers. And us at PWAG, we work to create and to strengthen feminist networks. And I think this is exactly what is happening today. So this makes me very happy. And I just want to encourage everyone to feel free to share their thoughts and not to feel too shy or intimidated by the amazing speakers that are here today, but to actually feel invited to share your own vision as well. So I wish you a nice session.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to introduce first my friend, my comrade, Nuria Costa, who has dedicated her life to the revitalization of the rural areas in Mexico and the recognition of its people, especially of rural women. She has co-founded several local, regional, and national organizations and network, including the Centro Nacional de Capacitación del Consorcio Valor Rural and the Red Nacional de Mujeres Rurales. Whew. Sorry about my Spanish, which provides microcredits for women. Thank you, Nuria, for being here, and please take it away.
In Mexico, poverty in the rural areas is very high. Over half the country lives in poverty, in conditions of high and very high poverty, and especially in rural areas. In rural areas where indigenous women live, where peasant women live. Paradoxically, our country is one of the 13 countries all over the world with the highest biodiversity, which is with the highest richness in biodiversity, paradoxically with very, very high levels of poverty, which is concentrated especially in rural women. This generates a feminization of agriculture, of poverty, and of land ownership, because women, rural women, are increasingly participating in the economic development of their families. They take on this responsibility. 6 out of 10 women support their households. This leads us to a condition of insecurity. Violence has also soared with the pandemic, although in the rural areas, the negative impact of the pandemic has been lower. And this has taught us that the rural environment is an opportunity, and its life conditions, the rural environment should be taken into account for the development of the country. It is not possible to have this extreme poverty in rural areas. It is not possible to have all these environmental problems, high levels of deforestation, a lot of pollution in our rivers, in our lands, due to a series of conditions, of impositions for practicing agriculture with chemicals, with not a lot of awareness and not a lot of public policy for development in these regions. Rural women in my country, they're a bit over 13 million. It's a lot of people. It is a population that rural population is 20% of our population, 25%, and more than half are women. But let's talk about our dreams, what we want to share with you. For this solidarity that all the countries share, our dream for a stable economy, a socially stable economy that really benefits a population at large, We want sustainable and permanent development. We want to achieve conservation of our natural resources, of our environment, and we want to develop a society that is increasingly empathetic, less machista, less male, less sexist, more responsible in the need of strengthening our needs and communities, aware of an identity that has given us our roots, our history, our everyday lives, and that enables a governmentality and a country that ultimately will give us a quality of life, enable harmonious relationships with equity and with peace. These are our dreams, and we share them with women in the rural areas, but not only, also with other women all over the world. We want those trees of life to flourish, to grow. Quality of life, fruits, development with strong roots, roots that are empowerment, and development with equity, development that is comprehensive and sustainable. This also entails our day-to-day work, not only in our communities, but also we can say the call or the appeal to solidarity. We want different countries to incorporate in their visions, in their understandings of nature, the importance that the rural areas have had for their development. And we want them to understand that in these rural areas, there are women, there are children, and it is an enormous richness that we have to strengthen there, that we have to value in terms of their strategic role that contributes, and the way that this contributes to a country. We need to build strategies for the quality of life. We need to do this from our homes, and we are doing it from our homes. And we need to continue this ongoing permanent struggle to call for solidarity, awareness in all society, also in our families, but also summoning urban areas and urban dwellers and people who are ruling and governing our countries. We need to contribute to public policy with a gender-based perspective, and we need to understand that we are an us, a collective, and not only individuals. We are a collective that is building opportunities that we want to have. What for? This is the big question. What for? Why? To us, it is crucial to have an awareness and a vision of dignity. Everything that dignity entails, dignity of a woman, dignity of a family, dignity of a society and a community, and also of a country, a nation, where we have a territorial understanding, a territorial vision, but it is mega diverse, not only in its natural resources, but in the cultural riches, of our nation. So dignity of our values as people on the personal level, strength, also transmission of our dignity, and as a principle of our society, dignity. Another important value that is important to incorporate, and we have incorporated in our vision, is a territorial understanding. All regions are different, and all regions are very rich. Now I can see my presentation has been presented. If we can move a little bit forward. If we can move forward, if you continue to move forward, please. Because we are in our dreams. This has to do with the feminization that we have in our country. It is clear, increasingly clearer, that women are present in the rural areas. Please move forward with the presentation. Please move forward. Here it says that there are more than 14 million people in our country in the rural areas. From 10 homes, 6 women are in charge of their domestic economies. That's data from the year 2000. And we live this situation that I already mentioned: violence, insecurity, extreme poverty, food insecurity, pollution, destruction of natural resources. Please move ahead, move forward. But our dream is to fight more and more for changing this. This is our dream, and in this dream, we work on a daily basis so as to achieve that heart, that center of quality of life, harmony, and peace, which includes economic growth, conservation of the environment, and human development as a collective awareness, a collective consciousness, so that this can be a real, sustainable, permanent, ongoing dream on a daily basis. Our dream is to achieve this, to have this, to live this, and to count on the solidarity of our people. Please move ahead, move forward. Please move ahead. That is the tree that I was talking about before, with the big roots that refer to the empowerment of society, men and women, through respect and gender-based visions, a revalorization of women and indigenous and peasant women for sustainable development that can give us this huge tree that has to do with quality of life and that has to do with permanent development. Move ahead, please. With social capital, that is the tree trunk, people. And these opportunities of empowering, of achieving that tree, please move forward, with a solid roots, with a robust trunk, and those branches that give us life, because that is what these trees represent. But what for? Why do we take on this struggle on a daily basis for these fundamental values that Margo was also mentioning? And she was asking us what these values are for us. The value is in a person and the principle is in a society: dignity, recovering identity. We need not to get lost in everything that is bombarded to us through the means of communication, through media, and that those messages that we get that say that we don't have culture. We need to recover dignity. In our country, it's more, we have 70, 80 different cultures within Mexico. So the territorial vision, the territorial understanding is a principle that we cannot leave aside. Please move forward. Next slide. And our vision, we want to achieve solidarity in our families, in our regions, in our country. This has to be integrated as this image, which is development that is integrated and integrating. We need to have awareness as citizens. We not only should benefit from certain policies and a certain view, understanding of a country, but we also need to act to achieve this development. This development is centered, and this dream to achieve it, it is centered on people, on their empowerment, on their social empowerment, and that dignity and revalorization that has to do with knowing and understanding our rights, in a sustainable use of resources, in understanding that the rural areas do not only live off agriculture. There are many other activities And in a very important way, we need to understand the difference of for a gender-based focus, a gender-based understanding, and we need to work with youth, with young people, with their values, with their dreams and their particularities, their specificities. Next, please. That is what I wanted to share with you today. That has been 10 minutes, and I hope that I have not overrun my time a lot. And again, my heart is with you. Thank you very much. I am very, very happy to be here and to have been invited to participate.
Thank you, Nuria. That was brilliant as always, and so inspiring and so visionary. You know, mega diversity, think about that. And not just in the size sense, but in the big future, big possibilities sense. So in the qualitative sense, not just numbers. So as for our those of you who are just listening, please just take a few minutes or a few seconds to just write down your reactions. Make note of your reactions. And what Nuria said inspired you to think about or feel as you are considering your own vision. So next, we hear from Camila GODOI. By the way, we have a real scientist among us, and she is a chemical engineer, right? But beyond that, she's also an amazing musician, a double bass player, a composer, and a singer, as well as being an educator. And as an educator, Camila works in the feminist training course for popular legal promoters, PLPs, and in some courses at Girls Rock Camp in Brazil. Camila, I want to learn the bass from you. That's a whole nother conversation. So welcome, and please share with us.
Hi, everyone. I want to first thank PeaceWomen across the globe for the invitation. And I want to thank Marilia Cayano, the interpreter, that's going to help me translating from Portuguese to English, because I'm going to feel more comfortable speaking in English. Very thanks. Para uma maneira possível de abordar
or a possible way to approach the questions proposed for this seminar is to think about the future that capitalism and the patriarchy is trying to constantly interrupt, tries to constantly interdict our fight, because the extreme right that is becoming stronger and stronger worldwide to right extremists, there is no doubt that we feminists and the LGBT population represent a menace to the system of capitalist exploitation and patriarchy, and to think in our world, in our possibilities, in the potency of our struggle, pass through the comprehension of why the right extremists try to interdict our fight, and why they see in us, in our feminist and LGBT activism, the possibility to stop the exploitation of people. One of the things that the feminist struggle is always bringing forward is the role of women in the capitalist and patriarchal systems of exploitations. The role of women as reproductive vases, of reproductive machines, of cheap labor work, and the role of women as caretakers of this labor force, the exploitation of work, of paid work of women as reproducers of new workers and as caretakers of this labor work. This non-paid work of women is one of the pillars that sustains this capitalist exploitation. So one of the questions that the future, the feminist fight is a revolutionary fight. It's a fight, a struggle that will attack the center of the capitalist exploitation, mainly because our struggle also attacks another pillar of the capitalist exploitation, that is racism. So as what we propose as a more just society goes against two pillars of the capitalist and patriarchal exploitation in the world. So when we think about the three values that are fundamental, that are essential for the construction of our future, one of these values, considering a peripheral woman, a Latin American woman, a Brazilian woman, is our struggle for the decriminalization of the abortion. A struggle that faces this role imposed by the patriarchism and the capitalism as reproducers of cheap labor work to be enslaved. A second value that I consider very important and that also brings discomfort to the right extremists is our capacity to collective construct, to horizontally construct, to build communities without hierarchies. As this event we are experiencing today through the internet, each and one of us in our territories, in our networks, in our networks of strengthening and we listen to each other, we construct together without hierarchies. In a common ground, we act together as a community, and that goes against the hierarchization and meritocracy that capitalism and the patriarchy imposes to each and everybody around the world. So the second value that I consider very important in our struggle, and that menaces the right extremists. In the case of Brazil, as you know, we have a right extremist government with fascist tendencies. And so what frightens them is that capacity of constructing horizontally and without hierarchy. And that is also scares the patriarchy and the capitalism. And it's a defiance to, it's an menace to this power that is militarized and hierarchy. A third value that I consider fundamental in our struggle and that builds our future is our capacity to listen to each other warmly, attentively, and that strengthens us, that makes us stronger, that sharing her pain can be something that strengthens her and us that are listening. It's a transforming value to be able to listen like we do. Both the person that is sharing, the woman that's sharing, and the woman that is receiving these stories. And this has enormous potential for transformation. As for characteristics, considering what are the characteristics that we as feminists must have to take our struggle forward. One of the main values that we must keep is our intersectionality, our capacity to understand that the struggles of each woman, each kind of human, it's not disconnected, it's not parted from a major and struggle and from other struggles like gender, race, sexual orientation, and that puts everybody's in the system and the patriarchy and the capitalism system. So our capacity to think about the several oppressions and to see how they interconnect and to see how our macro causes and our macro conflicts and are interconnected with our micro universes, and that in this interconnection is what feminists have brought forward continuously in our struggles. And as for the third point, what causes affliction to us here in Brazil regarding to our fights here? It's something that in Brazil is characteristic, is considering our colonial past that meant the decimation of the indigenous population of the continent of Brazil. And this genocide not only meant the extermination of the bodies, but also meant the imposing of a single religion. And in Brazil, 80% in Brazil, the population in Brazil that are religious declare themselves Christians. And the Christian churches in Brazil are connected to the right extremists and to the defense of values and defended by right extremists. And I myself am atheist, and what it can bring us some anguish here in Brazil is how we feminists how can we make this dialogue between the religion in Brazil and our beliefs as feminists, and how she brings forward the story of the passage of the Bible about the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary and how it has an impact on the psychic of women. The founding myth of Christianity in her view is not an act of consent, but of submission to a male Almighty God. So one of our anguishes here is how to see through the fight of feminism, the struggle of a feminism with this under this Christian context. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Camila. That was really important, the way you brought in the importance of faith and religion as, you know, both oppressive and potentially liberatory strand too, in dealing with the isms that you just described, and really thinking about the relationships between macro and global and the micro. That is what happens interpersonally and among ourselves at the very basic level. Thank you so much. And so again, before we go to the next speaker, please just write down some of your thoughts, your feelings, reactions as you listen to our wonderful second speaker, Camila. Our third speaker is Felogene ANUMO. Felogene is a passionate feminist activist with experience in advancing gender and economic justice through grassroots and online activism. I guess she's a member of the younger generation, you know, like really online. That's great. We need that. And just note the intergenerational nature of this panel, which I'm just really loving. Again, she's advancing gender and economic justice through grassroots and online activism, research and capacity strengthening of young feminist-led organizing, right? Which is, again, amazing. Her roots in feminist movement building were planted at the University of Nairobi, where she served as the Women Students Chairperson across 7 campuses. So thank you so much, Felogene, for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you, Margo. I'm holding on to my youth. I still am young. And that's a program that I actually led at AUYEUNG, which is the Association for Women's Rights in Development. And of course, Margo is our lovely board of directors. And so thank you for inviting me to join this very exciting panel, and just really inspired by what I've had so far. Of course, Nuria and Camila have made my job very, very easy by their presentations that they have done ahead of me. And so I would like to, first of all, appreciate the questions, because they really made me reflect both on my personal activism, but also what we are trying to do as an organization in intervening in this moment. And so in just reflecting with the questions, I will perhaps disrupt the order and begin with the last question in terms of what is confusing about the work and the situation as you imagine the future you wish to create. And for me, I think part of the challenge in advancing some of the work around economic justice and pursuing, gender, racial, and economic justice is what I tend to think is a false dichotomy between vision and reality. And so how do we challenge that as we advance our visions and ideas? How can we ensure that vision becomes practice, right? And so thinking about this moment and coming back to what everybody has said, I think it's also clear that a feminist economy is really an idea whose time has come, not just because of the COVID-19 crisis and the analysis, like you say, Margo, has been done around how it's placing systemic failures about the present dominant economy into sharp focus. But I think what we are seeing around climate crisis, around the growing authoritarianism we have had from Brazil, and I'm sure a lot of the attendees would speak about that, including my context, Kenya. We are seeing the consolidation of anti-rights forces and how that is also showing up in traditional spaces that we used to claim our human rights and all our and the rights in multilateral spaces. And these are just a few of the multiple crises that are going alongside the COVID crisis. But then what we also know and what we also hold on to is that feminists are not new to the challenge of multiple crises. I think because of our identity and systemics and how systemic systems of oppressive systems operate, we know that this is what has been our lived realities. And so we have a long history of really resisting racism, coloniality in my country, Kenya, and the work that has been done by Global Southern feminists, modernity and all its ills, and including the dominant economic system. And so from movements like anti-racist, queer, indigenous, including rural feminists, migrants, to sex workers, we have been seeing that they are on the front lines of a lot of these crises, building economic, political, social, and cultural systems that are really rooted in our very own self-determination, in mutual aid, in reciprocity, and I think that has been mentioned by the other panelists, and ensuring that this is both theory and practice. And this has happened for a very long time. And in fact, if we even just reflect about this moment, we see that feminist solidarity right now is what is really driving some of the innovative and much needed response. We saw the mutual aid and support that went to sex workers, which has been decimated really as an industry. We've seen a sharp focus into demanding the care systems and the strengthening around that. We've seen solidarity networks, including transnational feminist organizing, providing food, health, education, and a lot of support to communities. And so based on this thinking, one of the projects and experiments that we are doing around this time, and I'm going to come to the principles and visions around that, is what we called a global feminist bailout manifesto. And this manifesto is really rooted in people's collective power to demand and to shape structural change towards how we can transform our economies and societies to ensure that they are centered with care. And so the demands of this bailout system is one, that social infrastructure and systems of care for people and the environment are the foundations of thriving economies. I think this has become very, very clear in this moment, especially when we saw essential workers being dubbed as essential. And for a very long time, they were not remunerated as essential, they were not recognized as essential. But I think this is a clear demand and a consistent demand that has happened of feminist movements. Secondly, I think when we talk about economies and we look at economies, capitalism has often pushed back on this idea of one economic system. But I think as feminists, what we vision and idealize is we need to recognize the plurality of economic models. And I think this also helps with some of the struggles around vision as practice, because when you think about El Cambalache in Chiapas in Mexico, I'm sure, Nuria, you might know about the group, they actually have a model that is pushing back on money and what they call a moneyless economy. And so how do we value things and reclaim the idea of what we value? Because we know capitalism has really taken that away from us. And that is part of the challenge that we are facing presently. And then thirdly is how do we define wealth? So we need to redefine wealth as a community asset. And as feminists, we know that because we know that wealth is really created through both our collective unpaid and paid labor. But often what capitalism and our dominant economic systems prioritize the paid labor and underpay and wage the unpaid labor. And then this moment also calls us to push back and say, how can we transform and restructure the global economy? And so our bailout demands are not it's not our feminist future, but we think is the first step to demand what we need in a feminist economy. And so if we are to situate this in what feminist realities could look like, this could mean an array of different things. And I think for me, Margo, this also comes back to your question around what are we seeing? Because we know we have the analysis. We have done the analysis for years. But how are we amplifying some of these realities to actually say that the future could be here and now and disrupt the idea that the future is somewhere in the past, but it can exist, right? And so we have seen in the policy realm, for those who are following policy and of course, push for change through national governments, international governance systems and multilateralism, there's hope. We've seen an example of that in Bolivia. We know what the damaging effects of IMF and World Bank have particularly done to us in the global south when you look at austerity measures. So Bolivia had an example earlier this year where they returned nearly $346, including interest to the IMF, because they say that this is unconstitutional, but is also unnecessarily saddling its economy with debt. So really speaking to the debt justice and what are the demands in terms of debt justice. We've also seen in Mexico when a commitment, and with governments, it's a political commitment to deprioritize GMOs, because we know how problematic GMOs are. We know how that is pushing back on our food and seed sovereignty struggles and agroecological practices. And they're committing to ensure that they prioritize local output and sustainable agroecological practices. And then finally, of course, around the issue of pandemic profiteers, we see that there's a policy move to actually impose corporate tax, about 15%, which really could unlock funds for some of the work. Now, why it's important sometimes for us to mention this is because we think that our feminist futures must both be resistant to any oppressive system, but must also be propositional, right? And so this is the resistance that people are doing to the existing system. The propositional, and this is where the values and principles that I think we need to be guided by in the feminist future are really one that practices that challenge the hierarchical structures. I won't talk about this because I think Camila talked beautifully around why we need to dismantle the hierarchy in terms of how we're operating. And then secondly, the other principle is that there needs to be a circular relationship between practice and theory. I think this, first of all, is what makes our feminist futures seductive. How are we bringing people along? How are we ensuring that this feminist futures is for all? And so realizing that the future is not a place, but it's a process, and there might never be an endpoint to it, right? So how do we continue to ensure that that cyclic relationship continues? And then the third thing that I would push as a principle is that there's no ownership, but rather there's stewardship. So this would ensure that we understand that care for life beyond people and including the planet should never be owned. And of course, this speaks to our current challenge of what we are seeing as COVID millionaires, people who are actually taking advantage of a pandemic, to gain unimaginable amounts of wealth. And in fact, one of the challenges that we always face when we're doing the economic justice work and trying to energize people against the resistance is how do people visualize the number of zeros that are in a trillionaire, for example, which is where Jeff Bezos and the Amazon company is ending up. So it's obscene amounts of wealth. And really the heart of what I think the feminist future should be is not around ownership, but a model of a stewardship, because then how do we take care of what we have and ensure that it's not ours? Same way we refer to the ancestors, the same way we think about future generations is how we need to reframe our thinking. So I think I will stop there, but in terms of how do we ensure solidarity with the feminist movements, we know that really the transnational organizing, global governance architecture really relies on connections like what we are having today. How do we continue to strengthen the local and the global movements and cross-regional connections? And how can we contribute to thriving movements and our collective power in action? So I look forward to questions and of course hearing everybody else, but just a few thoughts about, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm just so thrilled at how the three presentations have really been so connected, and the themes just going across and from three very different regions of the world. Can you imagine how much work that's being done in consciousness and activism, and then what Felogene described as really connecting theories and practices, that these three speakers so far can make those connections through their individual presentations. I love it. I'm inspired and feeling very, very emotional as usual when I'm inspired. And Felogene, from your presentation and also from Camila, just and all three presentations actually, just really thinking also about this question, when and what are post-colonial? Like, what does that actually mean as lived experiences, as people are living those experiences? And what about places that are still colonized? And what about neo-colonialism in all the forms that it's taking in all the countries that you all represent, but everywhere in other parts of the world as well? And of course, a key concept that you raised for us, Felogene, is, this concept of stewardship rather than ownership. And I think that's a wonderful lead into our next presenter, who is also a Bay Area, San Francisco, USA Bay Area friend and a new friend and a comrade. Fuifuilupe NIUMEITOLU, I hope I didn't butcher that too much, is a Tongan Pacific Islander scholar, poet, and community organizer. I think also just as a footnote, it's interesting how all four of our panelists are poets and writers and just so creative in a more conventional sense. She's one of the founding members of the Moana Nui Pacific Islander Climate Justice Project and Oceania Coalition of Northern California, community organizations working for Indigenous Pacific Islander self-determination through organizing land and climate justice projects. She also, the group also facilitates groups and ceremony with Pacific Islander prisoners in Northern California. As you know, the US has the highest rate of incarceration of any country in the world. Working with incarcerated persons, as well as creating solidarities with California American Indian tribes to protect indigenous sacred spaces in California and in the Pacific. Fui is also part of the Segura Te Land Trust, an urban indigenous women's land trust located in Oakland, California. Welcome, Fui, and looking forward to your ideas, thoughts, feelings.
Thank you so much, Margo. Wow, Margo, that was an old bio, but one that's so important to me, and I thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I didn't talk about your books and books.
No,
things like
not
that.
at all. Please, that's excellent. Please, no. Well, I guess why I'm saying that, Margo, is because I am returning back after COVID. Fortunately, and a great blessing to work with our brothers and sisters who are behind bars. And so, when you read that bio, I was just thinking to myself, I was just so touched. I was so touched, sisters, and I think to myself before I begin my presentation, I just really want to give a shout out, right? And I just want to say to our kainga, to our relatives behind bars, o ko atu ni I offer mo pe mo lo tu kato kilao. Ko mo offer atu. Ko offer atu ke mo do. Malo mo dau hia dau wa. I just wanted to say to our relatives behind bars that I love them. To the sisters especially, that I had met for many years, who cared so deeply about me, in many presentations and in the dissertation that I and brothers, relatives who are here in this panel today. My PhD dissertation took me 15 years to complete. And I really want to, the research is on violence against women, specifically rape and sexual violence in Tongan and Pacific Islander communities, and especially within families. And I've said this before, but I just really want to say it right now, especially in this feminist circle, that it was really the brothers and sisters behind bars who helped me to continue the dream, because I had left it. The pain was so much that I had left the research. It was them who encouraged me through their great care and through their examples to come back to this commitment of writing about violence against women, especially about how rape and sexual violence is a colonial project, right? Is a colonial project for us as Pacific Islanders. And it is also a project, because it's so essential to the colonial project, that it also destroyed our families, and it destroyed our va, or sacred relationalities that are shared, not only between us as human beings, but especially with our Mother Earth. You know, I also want to thank you so much to Margo. You know, I know that I'm doing a lot of gratitudes right now, and this is also part of my time. I also do this because this is part of our Pacific Island. This is part of my Tongan and Pacific Islander protocol. And I know that many times when I'm in academic spaces, people always, you know, it's an anomaly. Gratitudes and protocols of acknowledgement are an anomaly here in the West. And I do it thoughtfully too, not only because it's protocols that I honor, but because our work as Indigenous feminists, as an Indigenous Tongan woman, is that it's always for the next 7 generations, right? It is a work that honors our ancestors from the past. It also acknowledges that us here at this present moment, relatives, is a work that we hope nourishes our relationality, our sacred relationality, our va, with the next 7 generations. So it is for Pacific Islander young people, especially our young Indigenous scholars, that I hope that they know that we can refuse the Western standards and academic standards of individualism. And I got here by my own hard work. No, I didn't, not at all. In fact, I got here because of the great work, and it's because of our va, our sacred relationality with so many of our relatives, including you, Margo. I want to acknowledge your work and your great mentorship of so many of us who look up to you, especially relatives. I want to let you know that one of the ways that I know Margo and have come to so much respect for Margo is through actually her work and our work together, our collaboration with feminists, you know, white feminists, Chicana feminists, Latina feminists, African-American feminists in the radio program on KPFA, Feminist Radio. So it's a great honor to be here. And also to the wonderful panelists who have gone before me, who are also representing and giving voice to your ancestors. I want to thank you so much. It's a great honor. And I'm really, really humbled to be in this Talanoa space. Talanoa space for us as Pacific people is actually a space, our relatives, that is created specifically. Right? This is a cultural protocol. And this is what I always tell the young people, that our people as Pacific people, as Indigenous people, we're not afraid of difficult conversations. In fact, we have cultural protocols, right? Called Talanoa space. It is actually a space to have difficult conversations. And, you know, of course, as Indigenous people, our difficult conversations is going to include everything that they tell us not to have in academia. Right? That is also emotions, right? That is showing our great compassion, our love for each other. That is also centering the sacred, right? Centering the sacred in all the work and in our relationality with each other. So even in a Talanoa space, and especially perhaps I would say in a Talanoa space, we center those sacred relationalities, knowing that the conversations that we might have might not be something that we all agree on or come to a consensus on. But what we do recognize is that we recognize and honor each other's ancestors. We know that although I see you as an individual here, I know that it is actually the work of people from the past, people and non-humans from the past and even the present and the future that bring you here to this space. So it's really with great honor. And I want to give a big shout out to the young people that I know that said that they would be joining in this morning. Here in California, everybody, we got up at 4:30 this morning. I know you got up earlier, Margo, because that's the kind of warrior you are. So also relatives, this is also part of my talk. And also we talked about stewardship earlier. You know, it's with great humility. I'm actually zooming in, everybody, from Lishanaloni land. The Lishanaloni are one of the 8 tribes of Indigenous people. The original, I say this and I really mean it. I really want to emphasize this. They're the original and the last stewards of this land that's now known as Oakland, California. So this land is Oakland, California. This body of land is called Huchen. This is the original name for this land. This body of land, this living body of our Mother Earth. You know, to the good sister who just and the niece who just thank you so much from Kenya who just did her beautiful presentation earlier. I was thinking to myself that I'm going to change my presentation just a little, if that's okay, Margo. I am going to start with the last question, right? I'm going to start with the last question. The question that asks us, what is perhaps confusing? What is confusing about this present moment? Before I go on to answering that question, I'm actually just going to, I just want to talk, I want to give a little bit of a vocabulary. In the work that I do, especially in the work on rape and sexual violence as an essential colonial tool, I talk about white terror. It's actually just in conversation with other wonderful scholars. But I define white terror, it's a racialized and gendered violence aimed to produce colonial systems of family, gender, and sexualities against the bodies of Tongan women and girls. So don't know everybody, it's our relatives, we're an island nation located in the part of the Pacific or Oceania called Polynesia. Next to us is our relatives, the Samoans. Also, perhaps many of you also know Hawaii, right? That's on the other side. Wonderful, I can see we have wonderful relatives here, Chamorros from Guam, right? So these are all part of New Zealand, Aotearoa, are all part of the Pacific, right, or Oceania. And so just to give folks just a little bit of information on where Tonga is. Okay, and just returning back to the definition of white terror, this is in my work, both in the research and also in the community work, I really center, I use this as a methodological, perhaps, tool in the work that I do. Also, white terror, correspondingly, the scope of white terror is inextricably tied to the expropriation of the Tongan natural world, or the whenua, land, or our Mother Earth, our beloved Mother Earth, and also to the moana, our beloved Pacific Ocean. These are spatialities and Tongan cosmologies that are delineated as feminine and located at the core of what we define as the sacred. The sacred, like for many of you relatives and many other cultures, as you all know, the sacred is the core of our Tongan systems and economies of social relationalities. And it is the heart and the lifeline of Tonganness. And so the last question, the wonderful question that you posed, Margo, very recently I was on a PBS podcast where they asked me to please talk about the legacy of the London Missionary Society in Tonga that came in the 19th century, right? And I answered it actually by reading this particular little passage that I wrote in my dissertation. I wrote, the month of May 2015 was a time of political excitement in the streets of downtown Nuku'alofa, the capital city of the Tongan nation. Hundreds of Tongans that included intergenerational families consisting of elders, young children, babies, to exuberant youth, marching bands dressed in their Sunday best tupenu and ta'avala, joined together and marched the streets, united in a movement led by the Tongan Churches Forum, a coalition of Tongan Christian leaders consisting mostly of men, to publicly demonstrate their opposition to the Tongan government's aim to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, better known as CEDAW. The Tongan Churches Forum's exuberant demonstrations were rooted in their fear that CEDAW would alter the Tongan status quo and lead to the erosion of patriarchal power. by creating laws that would allow Tongan women to own land, allow the legalization of same-sex marriage, and it may also lead to granting Tongan women's reproduction rights that may include access to abortion. All three of these major women's rights are currently legislated as illegal in contemporary Tongan jurisprudence. In addition, the urgency for Tongan lawmakers to support the ratification of CEDAW was highly publicized by Tongan women's rights leaders and activists because according to a national study on domestic violence released in 2012, 77% of Tongan women are physically or sexually abused. As the statistics and the large public demonstrations against CEDAW illustrates, to be a Tongan woman in the 21st century is to know the hands of patriarchal violence and its various maneuvers intimately, and to know its familiarity and the silence that shrouds its horrors are norms that are embodied and intricately woven into the fabric of our Tonganness. So I just talked about a march, right? A march in Tonga, a march actually showing the legacy of white terror and how it confined and how it continues to define and confine our Tonganness, and especially as Tongan women, and for many of our Tongan gender non-binary brothers and sisters and relatives, that this is a reality that continues to define our lives. And so relatives, what happens too is that white terror is also at the heart of our Tongan migrations to the United States. When during the US occupation of Tonga during World War II, which is a project that in the research that I do talks about the US military systemic use of rape and sexual violence on the bodies of Tongan women as girls, as a weapon of oppression and subjugation of Tonganness. This also, and in 1945, what happens when the US supposedly leaves Tonga, which of course in the research I talk about that they never did leave Tonga. And actually what happens is that the powers of course are transferred into the US-based Mormon church, because the US-based Mormon church actually becomes, Tonga, we have the highest global record. Tonga hosts a global record of having the highest Mormon conversion and baptism in the 20th and 21st century. And it is these particular politics and the hand of US empire that navigates and instigates our migration here to the United States, including to Huichin, right, to the land that's now known as Oakland, California, or the East Bay, California. In the work that I do, I ask the question, so what do we as Indigenous women, as Tongan women, who are brought here through the legacies of white terror, what do we do on this land, on this body of land that was also created by white terror, right? Which is California and the East Bay, So, you know, relatives, when I show a picture, a photograph, an image of hope, I show this image. This is actually taken in 2019, right before, you know, COVID happened, and what a great it was. This was actually an image on the Lishan Ohlone sacred site, the West Berkeley Shell Mound, the oldest Ohlone sacred site here in the Bay Area. This is also a land that I really want to acknowledge, and with great humility, that is stewarded by the respected Lishan Ohlone leader, Karina Gold. This image for me shows our solidarities, our multiple solidarities, our Dauki Va, or our honoring of our sacred relationalities with our relatives, first and foremost, honoring the Indigenous land that we're on. Right, this is on the land, of course, this is part of the project to save the West Berkeley Shell Mound, which is currently under threat by desecration, by Dana Ellsworth, one of the multi-million-dollar Berkeley landowners, right, who wants to, they want to develop this land, right? And also she's also working with California politicians to create laws to continue the settler colonial project of desecrating the sacred. In this particular image that you see, as you can see, this is a ceremony to honor the Native Hawaiian and Oceanian sacred site, Mauna Kea, right? In this photograph this is towards the end, everybody, but the ceremony included hundreds of people. And I have to just really say that what was so beautiful and just so moving about the ceremony is we organized it with young, really young, with youths from the community college, Pacific Islander, Native American, African American, and youths from the community colleges here in the Bay Area. In this photograph, you see our solidarity and our great love for our brothers and sisters in West Papua. That's the flag of the Morning Star, the one with the star right there. Where our relatives in West Papua is a genocide that's happening right now, where you see white terror happening. The US government, along with the Indonesian government, and also militaries, West Papua has the world's 3 largest gold mines. So, of course, this interconnection again between the use of the military, the Indonesian government's use of rape and sexual violence as a systemic, right, as a systemic weapon to oppress the people and to expropriate and also part of the theft of their land. Also because of the new green economy, right, the new green economy. West Papua also has one of the largest palm forests in the world. So you're seeing also the expropriation of West Papuan forests for the so-called good green economy, right? And you see Kukiai Mauna there. You know, Kukiai Mauna, the Kiai is the Native Hawaiian word for protector, where Native Hawaiians and other indigenous peoples, like for example, our relatives at Standing Rock, are saying, do not call us activists, we're protectors. We're actually following our kuleana, or meaning for the Native Hawaiians is our ancestral calling. For us as Tongans is our fatonia, right? We're not activists. We're a part of a cycle of ancestors who always stood up to protect the sacred. Right, and again, of course, you see the Native Hawaiian flag turned upside down. What you don't see here also is our relatives carrying the American Indian Movement flag. We also have relatives here from Palestine. We also have brothers and sisters who you're not seeing here, who are also part of the Black Lives Matters movements, and also the anti-police violence projects. Also, what is also beautiful in here as well, relatives, is you have many of our Irish relatives who are also making connections between their connection with Ireland, right? Defending the sacred sites in Ireland and creating those connections and bringing those values into the work that they're doing in creating and building solidarities with the Lishana Ohlone. So this is the last photograph that I show up, especially, and I want to draw also the hope that this image brings up in relationship to the first image that I described of the march in Tonga that was led by the Tongan male Christian leaders. This is actually led by young indigenous, queer two-spirit women, also following in the great leadership of indigenous women. So with great humility, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. And, you know, I think it's that we ended on the note of thinking really deeply about indigenous people is really important. And I put here in the chat a link to something that Karina Gould, who Fui mentioned earlier, always starts with, you know, which is the doctrine of discovery, the 1455 papal bull of Pope Nicholas that basically said, you know, you all European monarchs, go out and take, loot, rape, whatever you want that is not Christian. And at that time, there weren't that many Christians except in Europe, right? And so thinking about ideologies such as, it's not even ideology, it was a religious ruling by the highest leader in the Christian world, allowed the monarchs, you know, and actually encouraged the monarchs to take whatever they wanted. And also, it wasn't just for the European monarchs, but for the Catholic Church. And so just really thinking about that connection, I think, is important. Before we just take a quick musical break, you know, just again, take a few moments to reflect on what you heard and the connections among these presentations, right? What questions do you have, right? What are your emotional reactions to hearing these powerful, insightful, deep thinking, deep feeling folks say about the state of the world, about ways to think about feminism, actually do feminisms, and build solidarities. And also thinking about the things that we're confused about, because confusion is also important. You know, it's a certain kind of engine that helps us to go deeper in relationships and in our own thinking and our praxis, in our practice.